La Plata County, and Chuck Stevens is the county manager for La Plata County. And they're going to be sharing with us some information about the CPAW process, which is the Community Planning Assistant for Wildfire process. This has been going on for about a year now, a little under a year. And it's been a great opportunity to bring some outside resources into the area to help the county and help the partners in this area learn more about kind of best practices and some of the things that we can do together to move forward with our mitigation and fire prevention efforts. So thank you, Allison and Chuck, for joining us, and I'll go ahead and pass the camera and mic off to you.
All right, well, good evening, everyone. I think Allison is going to start our presentation tonight, but I'll just say hi. I'm Chuck Stevens. I'm the county manager. And Allison?
Hello. Thank you to WAP for the invitation for tonight. We're actually really excited to be able to talk publicly about all this effort that's gone on over the past year. And Chuck and I will divide and conquer. I'm going to kind of summarize what we did to get us to this point, and then you'll hear more from Chuck about what the next steps are and how you can be involved. So thank you for your interest in listening tonight, and we hope to talk to you more in the future if you have ideas and suggestions for us. So as Charlie kind of mentioned, we in January of this year started a process, and the Community Development Department, that's Building and Planning, as well as the Office of Emergency Management, pardon my cat, were who sort of took initiative and organized a group that we'll introduce later in this slideshow. And I wanted to talk a little bit about why this is something that's so important. I mean, we all know what's going on as far as wildfires that impacted our state this year and most of the Western United States. In La Plata County, part of the reason we have such a concern is right now, if someone were to purchase a parcel of land, they could build their house. And what you're seeing here, all these trees, are something that, really it's up to them. If they're aware of the wildfire risk, if they have experience living in another place where there were wildfire regulations and considerations, then that's really going to be an advantage. Otherwise, the county right now doesn't have specific guidance. So one thing that people question is, when is the planning department involved as far as land use considerations? And things that the planning department would work on is if someone were proposing a boundary adjustment, a subdivision project, lot consolidation, an additional dwelling unit, and then minor and major permits are things like an accessory use from their home or property, a business. Any of those things are where the land use department will have standards and requirements. And the main considerations are really around water, sewer, access, and compatibility. And this compatibility component can consider wildfire considerations. As we'll kind of examine here, there's not a lot that currently exists. I just took small segments of our existing land use code. Some of you may be aware that updated in October of this year, so October 1st, a new land use code was adopted and went into effect. And these are just references to some sections where there's considerations to impacts of either response, as far as it would be emergency response and wildfire would fit into that, or as far as construction, the natural hazard component is looking at things like steepness, and that's a big consideration as far as building in an area that has high risk to wildfire. So I'm not going to explain each of these, but I wanted to give you an idea of how they're touched on presently, but not in great depth. And one thing to note is that in 2003, the county did adopt the International Fire Code. Or the county has adopted, sorry, let me correct that. The county has adopted the International Fire Code of 2003, that version. And that's more looking at things like in what scenarios would a home be required to install sprinklers, or a business is going to be required to have sprinklers. It's looking at things like hazardous materials, and then burn permits are also a consideration in that. So these things are still kind of missing what we're all here on this meeting very aware of. How is your structure built, and then what are you doing as far as mitigation? So it was recognized we can do more as a county and as a community, and that's where the CPAW process begins. And just to bring up what that acronym stands for, Community Planning Assistance for Wildfire, is a program that's established program that the county applied for. In January of 2020, we did begin that process at no cost to the county. It was a program provided through grant. And so we received this assistance into the final form that we'll explain later in this presentation. The goal, what we were trying to accomplish, was creating hazardous assessment mapping specific to wildfire for La Plata County. Something that is available through various forums and entities, but has not been as specific or almost reliable as it could be, as far as really taking into considerations the specifics of La Plata County, and then achieving planning recommendations based on what currently exists in the county. So what I showed you earlier, the land use code, is one of the examples of what currently exists. There is a countywide hazard mitigation plan, a countywide CWPP. All those things were examined to figure out how do they work together and inform our decision making as planners in the land use process. There was a group of stakeholders who from the start, from January, regularly met with the county and with the CPAW committee to discuss what's currently happening in the county, where there were holes, where there were opportunities, and this list comprises who was participating in that conversation. So we had all the fire protection districts who were part of that conversation, as well as many organizations like Wildfire Adaptive Partnership, who is on the ground, who has that voice of what the community is saying and experiencing. So it's a really valuable process. And in addition to learning a lot from it, we got our recommendations, which I will have Chuck explain to you, as well as he's going to talk about what are kind of the continuing impacts of this CPAW program.
Right. Thanks, Allison. So one thing I really want to stress is the CPAW analysis of our county. It was not a quick process. You saw those stakeholders on the previous slide. There were a number of meetings, lots of virtual engagements, because as we kicked off, the grant was awarded in January. I think we had our kickoff meeting, and probably a month, maybe 5 weeks into the beginnings of how we were going to review and analyze La Plata County, we were dealing with the pandemic. And then all of a sudden we had restrictions on meetings and sizes of meetings. And so this was a very in-depth process that was going to take place to begin with. It got very complicated when we had to overlay the safety factors to ensure that we met in ways that were protected for those individuals. So this process began in January, and it did not conclude until end of August, early September. It was a full 9 months of very in-depth analysis. I think our site visits ended up being virtual, and I know we had some concerns about that, because how do you do a site visit when you don't actually go to the site? but I commend Allison and all of the stakeholders on that other slide, and you saw how many there were, for being willing to work through, thank you, Allison, to being willing to work through and figure it out. And that's really what 2020 has been all about for La Plata County is frankly, just being undaunted by the challenges we're facing and figuring out a way to accomplish the mission. So I just want to start by saying how proud I am of everybody on this slide and Allison, who took lead on the CPAW planning to get us to this point. So Allison, if you'll go back now to the next slide. So the CPAW group came in and they did their analysis and they did their final report, and they distilled it down to essentially 3 different recommendations, and you can see them there on the slide. So number 1, adopt a wildfire hazard assessment that can help us influence future land use decisions, and that'll be very, very important, and I'll hit on that in just a moment. Number 2, adopt the WUI interface requirements. What are the requirements if you're going to live in the WUI? And of course, I'm saying WUI, it's the Wildland Urban Interface. I think this group was probably very familiar with that acronym. And then finally, transition the county's CPAW steering group to a dedicated wildfire council of some sort. So I want to go back to number 1. Allison mentioned that the county just adopted a brand new land use code. It was adopted on September 15th of 2020, and it took effect on October 1st. Now, that land use code, as you're probably aware, took about 4 years, this iteration, to get that code drafted, go through the public process, and then ultimately get it adopted. And we had this parallel planning track with CPAW, and in an ideal world, we would have had those line up so that we would have had the CPAW recommendations before we had the draft of the land use code. But unfortunately, the timing didn't work out. So we adopted the brand new land use code, but what we did was we knew the CPAW process was going. We knew that our community has a heightened awareness about wildland fires, especially following the 416. We knew we wanted to incorporate some of the recommendations that were going to come forward. So we built placeholders into the land use code. And really it was just a mechanism that's going to allow us to incorporate recommendations after a full vetting, after a full public process. We can take those recommendations and we can put them into the land use code without having to do things like renumber chapters or we knew this was going to come, so we tried to facilitate the incorporation of these recommendations in a seamless way as possible. Again, nothing will be adopted into the land use code without a full public vetting and full public process. But we knew it was coming. We knew it's important to our community, and we wanted to set ourselves up for success. So we built in those placeholders. So we literally have chapters in the new land use code that say reserved for future use. And this is one of those future uses that we're talking about. Next slide, please, Allison. Okay, so I mentioned that the land use code went before the board and was adopted on September 15th, took effect on October 1st. On October 4th, we had the CPAW team virtually. They didn't literally come to the boardroom, but they virtually joined in a call similar to the one you're on tonight and gave their final presentation and their recommendations. And I don't remember, Allison, what did we spend? Hi, Kitty. We spent about, it had to be an hour and a half, I think, in that presentation. It was a very thorough and in-depth conversation. Do you happen to recall how long we spent on that?
I would say at least, yeah, I feel like we finished up, although we did start a little bit late, but maybe at quarter of we were finishing up, so. Yeah,
but it was not I guess my point there is this wasn't a rubber stamp. This wasn't just a quick presentation and then a thank you and a high five from the board. Especially this board with our 2 outgoing commissioners, Commissioners Westendorf, Commissioners Lackow. You know, they've been commissioners for 8 years. They've seen their fair share of disasters in La Plata County, whether it's wildfire or a Gold King mine spill and now a pandemic. they're very highly attuned to disasters in our community. And of course, wildfire is the one that not only impacts our community more frequently, but is the one disaster that we probably have the most ability to influence the outcome, potentially even prevent if we're doing our jobs right. So they take it very, very seriously. And that's the only reason I highlight the link to that presentation is because they asked some very in-depth questions. They really probed. They truly care about these things. And if any of you know Commissioner Church, he is very engaged with wildfire prevention and mitigation. So one of the key recommendations, as you saw from the previous slide, and I think it's been, we've tweaked the naming convention a little bit, but the board directed, following the presentation from CPAW, the board directed staff, so that's Allison and myself, and Allison's direct supervisor, Neil Stark, Yvonne, the community development director, to develop a wildlife advisory board. And this will be a volunteer board that will be appointed by the Board of County Commissioners to come forward and make recommendations. This will be the first line of not only the development of these potential regulations that could be incorporated into the land use code at a future date, but taking the expertise of individuals like this group that's assembled here tonight. I would fully expect one or more of you to apply for and potentially be appointed to this wildfire advisory board to make recommendations to the Board of County Commissioners. The board understands that they're not experts in all things, and they rely on our citizens to volunteer for, I think we have 30 plus different boards and commissions, and we rely on citizen volunteers to come forward and give us those recommendations, invest the time, and you know, the board wants to take advantage of the subject matter expertise that already exists in the community. So the Wildlife Advisory Board, once we figure it out and get it formed and organized, and it will likely come to fruition on the same cycle that we do with other boards and commissions. Allison, do you have a projected timeline for the development, the creation of the Wildlife Advisory Board yet?
Yes, wildfire. And the hope is that in December, the board can agree to either schedule a meeting when they can adopt that formally, or clarify that process. And we will be presenting in December a list of those nominees. So ideally by some point in January, that board would be in place and ready to start meeting.
Okay, thank you. And did I say wildlife? It must have been your cat. I have wildfire, obviously. So,
Right.
Okay. Yeah, we do have a wildlife advisory board too, living with wildlife. So I apologize if I get that wrong, but the Wildfire Advisory Board. Okay, and that is aligned with our normal boards and commissions timelines. We typically try to get volunteers together in October, November, December. The board will conduct interviews as appropriate, and then we do the appointments in January. So if all goes well, and again, that's the ideal timeline, and I don't want to, you know, we'll make every effort to meet that timeline, but this is the creation of a new board, and we have to overlay that with the fact that we do have 2 outgoing commissioners and 2 incoming commissioners, and that may delay this a little bit. So our goal will be to have it up and operational by January. It may slide a little bit. Okay, and then, so one of the functions of the Wildfire Advisory Board, of course, will be to review the International Code, Code Council's International Wildland Urban Interface Code, and make amendments and recommendations. Again, that's the recommendations. That's going to be the most valuable thing that comes out of this Wildfire Advisory Board is what are the things that you think are most important to our community that need to be codified in a code. Okay, and that's the important thing here. So we're not going to be talking about best practices or things along those lines. These are things that we're going to be codified in the La Plata County Code. And so we'll be looking for those recommendations. And of course, as I've said from the beginning, anything that goes into the code will absolutely be fully vetted, fully public process. public comment periods, lots of public input opportunities similar to what we did with the land use code. And just to give you some perspective, in 2020 alone, we had 34 public meetings to discuss the land use code, where we took public comment and public input, okay? So when you're talking about codifying something in a code, it's very, very important that we hear from all perspectives and that everybody who has an interest has the opportunity to make their perspective known to the Board of County Commissioners. Because as you can see at the bottom of this slide, the very next step, of course, is the Board of County Commissioners will make a decision, and that's usually to adopt and incorporate that into the land use code. All right, next slide, please, Allison. One of the big things that we're looking for and improving upon is in our mapping. And so this is an example of the existing mapping that's done. And you don't have to be an expert to just kind of look at this and go, wow, there's really not a lot of fidelity there. There's really not a lot of detail. I'm not really sure what useful information I can derive from this map. How is this map going to influence my decision making? How could we possibly use a map like this to influence land use planning decisions? You really can't. This is a map that's produced at the state level, I believe, and it just doesn't provide the fidelity that we really, really want in our local community. So if you go to the next slide, okay, this is a little bit better. So now right off the bat, oh, there's La Plata County. Okay, I can see it, there it is. I can see Durango, I can see Bayfield, I can orient myself very quickly. And now just changing the scale and the scope of the map, now you're starting to see, all right, red typically on a map is usually a high risk area. And I'm sure that that's what that means here. And so right off the bat, you're already getting more fidelity and more detailed information that planners could use if they were trying to look at a map. And of course, if we're creating the map locally, I don't know how many of you know my background, but I started with La Plata County working in the IT department, and the GIS team was actually one of the teams that I managed. And our GIS team, I'll tell you right now, is on par with the best in the state. I mean, our team is absolutely phenomenal. And so I know that what you're looking at, we could drill down into the details of this map and get unbelievably granular with what we're representing here, whether it's slope, whether it's vegetation. I mean, we can build layer after layer and get information on our locally produced maps that we'll never see from the state. Because the state, they've got to deal with 64 counties. If we're looking at it locally, we only have to deal with one. We do go a little bit off the edges there and address our neighbors to some extent, but really our focus is on the county, and we can get incredibly detailed planning. Next slide, please, Allison. All right, so what can you do? Well, first things first, we're gonna get, if it's not already done, and Allison's probably already done it, but the Cpa recommendations are gonna be posted on the planning website. Make yourselves familiar with what, again, this is an independent organization, came in at their expense. We didn't pay for it, we got a grant. They came in, they spent 9 months, they did an incredibly thorough analysis of our county, and they've made recommendations. And we have that final report. We're gonna put it up on the website, and anybody is not only free to read it, but encouraged to read it. And then all of the other things that the WAP, I always get this wrong, is it the Wildfire Adapted Partnership? All the things that they do, and the things that Ashley and Charlie have been doing over the, I don't even know, maybe 2 or 3 years that I've worked with. Charlie for sure since the 416, and Ashley I think just before that. Learn how to create a home ignition zone. Best practices like preparing a go bag, preparing before the wildfire, doing all of those things that are best practices that the WAP routinely educates and trains and encourages people to do. Allison, did you want to comment on anything here?
I will confirm the report is on the planning website. And let's see, so if it's under resources, I think there's a section on the main page for plans and for plans is what I want to say. So you would go to planning, the plans, and then resources, and it's the first item there. It's a PDF you can link into. And part of the reason it's important to read that is then to understand these next steps in the process. I think having that foundation and how we got here will just help us to be better informed when we make the decisions going forward.
And then finally, I mean, it's down here on the bottom. I'm moving my cursor, but it doesn't work because you can't see it. But where it says contribute your input to the amendments public review process, can't stress that enough. We will make public comment so easy. Frankly, we got really good at it in 2020. I mentioned those 30 plus public meetings that we did over the land use code. Many of those had to be in a hybrid format. So whether it was a virtual meeting like what we're experiencing right now, you can handwrite a note and mail it to the county. You can email it. We had a portal created to log in and drop your comments that way. You could call a commissioner. You could attend commissioner's office hours. You know, the pandemic, I guess the silver lining of the pandemic really was it forced us to be creative and to really think hard about how we were going to incorporate public comment, because you couldn't just say, hey, there's a public meeting tonight, show up and give public comment. Because we couldn't have those public meetings, at least in March and April. Now, in June, we did. We started having hybrid meetings. And in June, July, August, we did. We had hybrid meetings where you could either attend in person or attend in a virtual format. So look for that. But that is the single most important step that anybody can take as we go through the democratic process here to incorporate any kind of changes to the La Plata County Code. And I think that's all that I have, Allison. I think the next slide is all you. There you go. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks everyone for getting caught up on what we've been working on. Here is my contact if you want to reach out with any feedback in the future, but we'd like to stay on, and Chuck and I are happy to answer questions that you have for us this evening.
Roy,
you
you have
go
your
ahead.
hand raised. I can, let's see if we can unmute you and go
I got
ahead.
it unmuted. Okay. I was just wondering with respect to the international code, it seems like there are so many variables. Have they considered, as an example, the different types of vegetation? Let's say what we have here versus what the East Coast has versus what we see in California, as an example. The brush fires, I was just thinking, such a variation in their flammability.
Sure, I'll take first stab at this, Allison. I don't even think you have to go to the East Coast. I think you can just look between the northern part of our county and the southern part of our county, and the vegetation is dramatically different. We're very concerned. That map a couple of slides ago that showed those red areas and those yellow areas, if you look at it, you kind of see that reflected right there. Yeah, if you go there, I mean, look at the Northwest versus the Southeast, and that's largely due to vegetation. So just within our own county, that's something that is foremost on our mind, and that's where our GIS team is going to be just absolutely invaluable, because again, they're local. They're going to focus very exclusively on our county, and vegetation slope. Those are two of the key components for wildland fire, and those are two that we have to be concerned about. So as we do mapping, we'll be very focused on that. Yes, sir. Allison?
Yeah, that's a great question. In the Code Council's Wildland Urban Interface Code, they have some tools that are similar to what was created during the CPAW process as part of their recommendation. If you look at that report, I believe there are 9 different categories of vegetation in combination with the slope. And they are color coded. There is a map that we also have similar to the wildfire hazard assessment you're looking at right now. that identifies what that, essentially what they call the mitigation difficulty, what CPAW identified as the mitigation difficulty. So when you are looking at, and again, in the planning process, this is really going to be the most impactful when someone is proposing a project. However, just to kind of give that context, what that might look like, if the county were to say that we wanted to apply standards based on the mitigation difficulty to project proposals, then someone who's in the most difficult would either have to prove mitigation or develop a mitigation plan, maybe even build differently. Those are all things that we want to consider as far as making those amendments to be approved for our current code. And that depth in the WUI code, the international code, isn't clearly defined. They say you can have authority if you were to just straight up adopt ICC's code. It would say this body is then given authority to implement mitigation standards. We really want or hope to take it to the next level where we are looking at the detail of what's going on parcel to parcel and how we can most effectively protect property and reduce wildfire spread. Does that help answer your question? You're welcome. We like questions.
Could I follow up?
Yeah, go ahead.
Could I follow up with another one?
Sure.
My question is, if these are considered standards, do you expect that the governmental bodies, Board of County Commissioners, what have you, would even entertain people who wanted to relax some of these standards, or did they look at that and think of that, well, that would make us substandard? I don't know if that's clear or not, but to what extent do they give their buy-in? Can they relax things and not be considered that they've done something that's substandard?
Allison, do you want me to try and take that one first?
If you would like, sure.
Sure.
I'm sorry, I'm not really very clear, but
No, I understand the question. I believe I understand the question, sir. And so the land use code that we had, the one that was in place earlier this year that was just replaced, was a performance-based land use code, heavily reliant upon compatibility. And so a very subjective interpretation of what compatibility means. The new code that was just adopted is still a performance-based code, but we've tried very, very hard to develop prescriptive standards. So to try and clear up some of the questions that surround compatibility. So if you think about compatibility, if the continuum is, if you had zoning in your county, which we do not, we have performance-based zoning, but if you had typical Euclidean-based zoning, you would have on your continuum, you would have flexibility on one end, and you would have certainty on the other end. And with Euclidean zoning, you have certainty because you know what you can do with your property based on the zone you're in. So our county wanted more flexibility. They didn't want zoning, they wanted more flexibility. So we're still in this performance-based zoning code where compatibility is still a factor. But what we've tried to do is where we could incorporate prescriptive standards, we've tried to do that. And that's in chapter 70 of the new code is where we start to define and lay out standards. So this is going to be a shift for our community. So your question is really nuanced because, you know, you asked, is the board going to be willing to entertain a deviation from the standard? Well, that's an interesting question, because I think by definition, no, it's a standard. So if it's a prescriptive standard, an applicant should have to meet that standard. So that I believe is going to be the go-in position. Our new code is, what is it? It's 6 weeks old, and we haven't even had a first planning project come through on it yet. But I believe that is the expectation, is it's a prescriptive standard. You're going to meet the standard. Allison?
Thank you.
Great. Yeah, great job. I really like that. And I think one of the reasons to have the board, to have the public process, is to make sure that we are looking at all of the science and all of the expertise and taking those into consideration before we just say, oh, okay, someone else is doing it this way, so we should do it that way too. This is going to be a very well thought out process, so we're making intentional decisions for the best interest of La Plata County.
I have a question. Is there a queue or anything with these questions, or
I don't know.
is
Go
there
ahead,
somebody
Hon.
waiting ahead of me? Okay, Charlie. Well, I live in Bayfield, and you know, I used to be a transportation planner, and you know, the connection on Highway 160 between Bayfield and Durango is already probably the most congested, trafficked part of the entire Highway 160 from state to state, if I'm not incorrect. And, you know, there's increased interest in developing new commercial areas and more real estate development going down the way. And on one level, I have a great concern that, you know, we're going to look like Farmington, if that kind of thing. And, you know, I lived in Aspen for 4 years and actually did Snowmass's transportation planning for them years ago. And one of the things I have to say is, although there's been tremendous development in the Roaring Fork Valley, it has been done so well, so aesthetically, tastefully, that the valley actually looks better than it used to look when I lived there back in the early 70s. It's been done so well. And I have a lot of concern that if real estate development and people selling off their land is going to create incredible congestion and traffic and, you know, ugliness and Farmington-like development, it's also going to create obstructions to emergency vehicle movement if there's more and more lights and places where development's going to occur. Is the county taking that into account in their development and looking to create a very aesthetic, well-done development of that corridor? Because it's really of concern to me and many others living down this end of the pike here.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I would say that the way that the county is addressing that is through the district planning. Help me, Allison. The districts. What are they called? The planning districts. Yes, the district plans. Thank you. I'm fumbling over a word. Because that's where, especially with the compatibility, so it is a performance-based code. Compatibility is still very much a factor, and so that's where the locals who live along that corridor have the voice to, and I should back up, because before the land use code was adopted, all of the district plans were updated and revised. And so that was a year-long process as well. So I don't know if that district is in the southeast or if it's in the Bayfield district. I'm not sure. Jim Village is its own little special planning area as well. But those plans were all revised and updated. They were updated and approved by the Planning Commission in December of 19, I believe. And then, so that was complete before the land use code final iteration began in January of 2020. So that's where local residents who are concerned about the character of their neighborhoods and where they live, that's where they get their voice, is through those district plans.
So are these, am I a Johnny come lately to this, or is this all fixed already before? There's no chance to put in more input or what?
Lots of chance, because one of the things, so the district plans had not been updated in a very long time. And so one of the things that was most important, I think, to the Planning Commission was that they develop a cycle where the district plans are constantly reviewed and updated, and that they don't sit on the shelf for 8, 10, 12 years at a time. So no, the district planning groups are still very active. Again, those plans were just adopted not even a year ago. So I don't know what the cycle is that they're going to be refreshed, but there is absolutely a cycle for the district plans to, on a recurring and frequent basis, be reviewed and updated by the district planning groups.
Okay, so just the last question, I'll get off the here, but is there a district that is from Durango to Bayfield, or that's one planning district that can be looked at, or is it divided up into?
I'm not as familiar with the maps. I don't know, Allison, if you are, or if we could even pull up one of the district planning maps on the website real quick and share it. I'm not sure.
Yeah, let's use this as a opportunity. So I just shared the slide. I'm gonna stop share and then get back in, and I can show people how they can find their district. And in addition to your district, as there's two things. For one, as projects are being reviewed, if you're within 500 feet of the property boundary or 1,000 feet in Animas Valley, you'll receive notice of the project, and your input is always encouraged. I also would like to talk more about the emergency vehicle response, since you specifically asked about that. But real quick, to help you with your planning district, if you go to the GIS map, that's right on the planning website. They also have their own webpage for the county, and put in your address. So let's just do let's try that. So every parcel is identified, and I know I'm going quickly here. Feel free to reach the planning department for assistance using this tool. You can go to map layers and expand the menu here to find the planning district in this layer called planning and land use layers. And when you turn this on, it'll show every district. I'm gonna just move out and hang on, we're just catching up, but it will show the districts in the county where you are looking will be divided. And let's get to 160 up here. You're gonna see Bayfield and then the Florida Mesa. And another thing to be aware of on the planning website is you can look up those district plans under land use codes and plans at district plans. Here, each of the district plans are located. Within those are really goals, objectives, the intent of that district. So these are great places to go to understand, and then you can take it further by asking to join that district committee and providing feedback. So that's a real quick introduction on that. I also will take a moment really quickly to address the question you brought up. Will it be considered that emergency response vehicles can have the ingress and egress that they need? And yes, that's a big component of the new land use code. We went ahead of waiting for the contributing or including the wildfire planning, because emergency response is a huge consideration countywide, not only on the wildfire level. And so when you look at the new land use code, chapter 74 is dedicated to roads, bridges, turnarounds, dead ends. All these things were developed keeping in mind what emergency apparatus will be using those, and what level of service is necessary.
Just last, I assume that has to do with also if there had to be emergency evacuations as well.
That's a little tougher. In new subdivisions, any new subdivision, that is now going to be one of the requirements. As the county has evolved, making sure that there were always a secondary access wasn't on everyone's list. And so we know that's one of the reasons this process is so important right now, is we know there are neighborhoods that lack those secondary accesses, and we are moving forward with steps to make sure they're in place, and hope that through processes like this wildfire planning, that we can plan ahead to better prepare communities who don't have them in existence right now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So do we have any other questions from anybody else? Feel free to either type it into the chat box, or you can unmute yourself and just jump in.
Charlie?
Yep.
Yes, I would, considering who we are, our audience, I think it might be helpful in any way that what I did with our subdivision is just a small one, but I got into our design guidelines for homeowners, developers, that that people have to follow the Wildfire Adapted Partnership Recommendations, and kind of just referred to it instead of making our own standards. And of course, those standards of the WAP can be more stringent than what might come out of a community process in general. In other words, we can be our best advocates.
Yeah, that's a great point. There's a number of communities that have passed covenants within those subdivisions to ensure that that those best standards or practices are being met, or even the suggestions from different organizations like ourselves are being met, or the Colorado State Forest Service standards are being met. So that's another avenue within a lot of your communities to get things rolling, not necessarily on as large of a scale. So it's definitely something to consider within each of your communities as well. All right, any final questions? It looks like we only have a couple of minutes left.
Well, Charlie, if there's no questions, I would just like to take this opportunity to thank Ashley and yourself for inviting the county to come tonight. We're very excited about the CPAW grant. We're incredibly thrilled with the analysis and the critical thinking that went into their final report. And we're very much looking forward to continuing with the public engagement and trying to get some recommendations from the community and ultimately incorporate those into our land use code. So thank you for this opportunity. We very much appreciate it.
Thank you, and thank you, Allison and Chuck, for spending this Tuesday afternoon, evening with us. It was really great, really helpful presentation. I hope everybody else enjoyed it. But thank you for spending the time and sharing all the knowledge of this CPAW process. It's been a long time coming. I know that Ashley and I have been, involved with it on some level for a while, and it's really exciting to see kind of that initial process finish up and see where things go from here. So Ashley, do you have any other comments or anything else?
No, but thanks everyone for your time tonight, and thank you, Chuck and Allison. We really appreciate it.
Thank you guys.
Yeah, thanks.
Appreciate you guys hosting this.
Thank you. All right. Well, with that, we'll let everybody get out of here. Final thing is, Allison, would it be possible to get a copy of the presentation for us to post on our website or send out to people that weren't able to attend?
Absolutely, thanks.
Perfect. Well, with that, I hope everybody has a good night. Thank you again, Allison, Chuck, and everybody else who attended. Hope you learned something new, and hopefully we'll see you at the next one.
Woohoo.
Thanks everyone.
Yep.
Thank you guys.
Yeah.